Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor of Judea, stands as a pivotal figure in both historical and religious narratives, particularly regarding the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. His life and role in one of the most significant events in Christian theology are detailed across various sources. According to the four Gospels of the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Pilate was the authority who, despite his reservations, ultimately authorized the execution of Jesus. His interactions with Jesus and his hesitant decision to bow to the demands of the Jewish leaders are recounted with vivid detail. The Gospels describe Pilate's internal struggle and the pressure he faced from the Jewish authorities and the crowd that demanded Jesus' crucifixion. Moreover, historical sources outside the Bible, such as the works of the Jewish historian Flavius Josephus and the philosopher Philo of Alexandria, further shed light on Pilate's governance of Judea. Josephus described Pilate as a strict and often ruthless ruler who faced numerous uprisings during his tenure. These sources suggest that Pilate was a figure who found himself caught between maintaining peace in a volatile province and upholding Roman law. His decision to crucify Jesus was not merely a legal one, but also politically charged, shaped by the social and religious tensions of his time. The combination of these sources, from the Gospels to historical accounts, allows us to form a multifaceted understanding of Pilate. He was a man who, while holding considerable power, was also constrained by the political and social forces around him. His washing of his hands, symbolizing his attempt to avoid responsibility for Jesus' death, has since become one of the most recognizable images of evasion of guilt, resonating through history as a symbol of moral weakness. To fully grasp Pilate's story, one must explore not only the biblical narratives, but also the complex political and social dynamics that influenced his decisions during his time in power. Pontius Pilate faced a grave and multifaceted dilemma as he stood at the center of the events leading to Jesus' crucifixion. The Jewish religious authorities had presented Jesus to Pilate, accusing him of blasphemy and insurrection. However, Pilate found no substantial evidence to justify a death sentence. John 18:38. In fact, he attempted several times to release Jesus, going as far as suggesting the customary release of a prisoner during the Passover festival, hoping that the crowd would choose Jesus over the notorious criminal Barabbas. Yet, much to Pilate's surprise and dismay, the people demanded Barabbas' release and insisted on Jesus' crucifixion. Matthew 27:15-26. Pilate's reluctance was evident throughout the trial. He seemed torn between the demands of justice and the need to maintain public order. The crowd's growing fervor, spurred on by the Jewish leaders, left Pilate with little room to maneuver. Despite his clear hesitation, Pilate ultimately succumbed to the crowd's pressure. He symbolically washed his hands in front of them, attempting to absolve himself of responsibility for the death of Jesus, an act that would echo throughout history as a representation of moral cowardice. Pilate's dilemma illustrates the tensions between authority, justice, and political expediency, as he was aware that his decision would not only impact the immediate situation, but could also have broader political ramifications. By condemning Jesus, Pilate hoped to quell potential unrest in Jerusalem during the Passover, a time of heightened religious and nationalistic sentiment. However, the decision to crucify a man he believed to be innocent weighed heavily on his conscience. This internal struggle between maintaining order and executing justice would later come to define Pilate's legacy, as his actions were scrutinized and interpreted as either a calculated political move or a failure to uphold moral integrity. As Pilate grappled with the decision to crucify Jesus, his wife, Claudia Procula, played an unexpected but critical role in the narrative. According to the Gospel of Matthew, Claudia had a disturbing dream on the night before Jesus' trial. Troubled by what she had seen, she sent a message to her husband during the proceedings, imploring him to have nothing to do with that righteous man. Matthew 27:19. Her dream, which remains a mysterious and unexplained element in the Gospel, is viewed by some as a divine warning meant to prevent Pilate from condemning Jesus to death. The brief mention of Claudia in the biblical account has led to various interpretations throughout history. Some theologians and scholars suggest that her dream was a supernatural intervention, while others believe it may have reflected a more general sense of unease that surrounded the trial of Jesus. Claudia's warning underscores Pilate's internal conflict. Her plea added a layer of complexity to his decision-making process, further amplifying the gravity of his choice. Despite her warning, Pilate ultimately ignored his wife's advice and proceeded with the execution, a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Claudia Procula's intervention, though brief, highlights the theme of conscience and divine intervention in the Passion narrative. Christian tradition has since sanctified Claudia, viewing her as a voice of reason and compassion, a figure whose moral clarity contrasted sharply with her husband's indecision and weakness. The crucifixion of Jesus is one of the most iconic events in Christian theology, and Pilate's role in it cannot be understated. Despite his initial reluctance, Pilate ordered the execution to take place. Above Jesus' head, Pilate had an inscription placed, written in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek, which read, "Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews." John 19:19. This inscription was both a legal charge and a political statement, subtly mocking the Jewish authorities who had insisted that Jesus was claiming to be a king. As Jesus hung on the cross, Pilate's internal turmoil must have been immense. The Gospels describe various supernatural occurrences during the crucifixion, including an inexplicable darkness that covered the land and the tearing of the temple veil. Matthew 27:45-51. These events, interpreted by many as divine signs, would have only deepened Pilate's sense of unease and guilt. The Gospel accounts suggest that the crucifixion was not just a physical event, but a moment of cosmic significance, where the forces of good and evil were in direct conflict. Pilate, despite his position of power, found himself caught in the midst of these larger, unseen forces. The method of crucifixion itself was designed to be a public display of suffering and humiliation. Reserved for the worst criminals, it was meant to serve as a deterrent to any who would challenge Roman authority. Pilate's decision to proceed with such a brutal form of execution, despite his reservations, speaks to the intense pressure he was under. He was trapped between the demands of the Jewish leaders, the will of the crowd, and his duty to maintain Roman law and order. This moment not only sealed Jesus' fate, but also set the stage for Pilate's own moral and political downfall. After Jesus was crucified, the weight of Pilate's decision began to take a profound toll on him. His soul was tormented by the knowledge that he had condemned an innocent man to death. The words of Jesus, spoken from the cross, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing," Luke 23:34, likely echoed in Pilate's mind, further intensifying his guilt. Although the Bible does not provide explicit details about Pilate's emotional state after the crucifixion, it is reasonable to infer that the psychological burden of his actions weighed heavily on him. Christian tradition holds that Pilate was never able to overcome the guilt associated with his role in Jesus' death. The decision to authorize the crucifixion haunted him for the rest of his life. Apocryphal writings and other extra-biblical sources, such as the traditions of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, elaborate on Pilate's anguish, portraying him as a man consumed by remorse. These accounts suggest that Pilate's attempt to symbolically wash his hands of responsibility did nothing to alleviate the deep moral burden he carried. Some traditions even suggest that Pilate eventually converted to Christianity, seeking redemption for his role in Jesus' crucifixion. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church, for instance, holds that Pilate acknowledged his guilt and sought forgiveness, though this narrative remains speculative and is not universally accepted. Regardless, Pilate's legacy as a man tortured by the consequences of his actions remains a powerful symbol of moral conflict and the inescapable weight of guilt. In the days following the crucifixion, Pilate faced a new dilemma: the resurrection of Jesus. The guards stationed at Jesus' tomb reported that the stone had been rolled away and that Jesus had risen. Matthew 28, 4-15. This news caused an uproar among the Jewish leaders, who feared that the spread of this information would undermine their authority. Pilate, desperate to maintain control over the situation, resorted to bribing the guards, instructing them to spread the lie that Jesus' disciples had stolen his body. Matthew 28, 12-15. However, despite Pilate's efforts to suppress the truth, word of the resurrection spread rapidly, and it soon became the central event in the burgeoning Christian faith. For Pilate, the resurrection represented a crisis of legitimacy. If Jesus had truly risen from the dead, it not only validated Jesus' claim of divinity, but also exposed Pilate as having condemned an innocent man. The resurrection was not just a theological event. For Pilate, it was a political disaster. It further eroded his authority and added to the weight of guilt that he was already carrying. The rapid spread of Christianity in the decades following the resurrection, including the conversion of many Jews and Gentiles, amplified the impact of Pilate's decision to crucify Jesus. The failure to contain the message of the resurrection reflected Pilate's broader struggle to maintain order in the face of events that defied both logic and Roman authority. The conflict between the temporal power of Rome and the emerging spiritual power of Christianity would continue to shape the political and religious landscape for centuries to come. Pilate's political fortunes began to unravel in the aftermath of the crucifixion. His governance of Judea had been marked by frequent clashes with the Jewish population, and his brutal methods of maintaining order had earned him a reputation for cruelty. One of Pilate's most notorious actions was his decision to use funds from the Jewish temple to construct an aqueduct, a move that sparked widespread outrage among the Jewish people. His inability to navigate the delicate balance between Roman authority and Jewish religious sensitivities eventually led to his downfall. Pilate's political enemies seized upon the growing discontent in Judea to undermine his position. Reports of his mismanagement reached Emperor Tiberius, who ordered Pilate to return to Rome to account for his actions. Pilate's final undoing came after he ordered the massacre of a group of Samaritans on Mount Gerizim, an incident that further inflamed tensions in the region. Lucius Vitellius, the governor of Syria, recalled Pilate to Rome, and his political career came to an abrupt end. Upon his return to Rome, Pilate faced a rigorous investigation into his conduct as governor. The political consequences of his actions in Judea were far-reaching, not only for Pilate, but also for the province he had governed. The investigation likely focused on his failure to maintain peace and his poor administration, reflecting the complex web of power and politics that characterized the Roman Empire. Pilate, once a man of great power, found himself powerless, living out his final days in shame and isolation. His downfall was a tragic irony for a man who had sought to preserve his position through injustice. The exact circumstances of Pilate's death are shrouded in mystery and speculation. Some historical accounts suggest that he committed suicide, unable to bear the weight of his actions and the humiliation of his exile. Eusebius of Caesarea, a 4th-century church historian, recorded that Pilate took his own life during the reign of Emperor Caligula. Other sources, such as the Roman historian Tacitus, do not provide specific details about Pilate's death, leaving room for various interpretations. Christian tradition has also offered different versions of Pilate's end. Some accounts suggest that Pilate converted to Christianity before his death, seeking redemption for his role in Jesus' crucifixion. The legend of Pilate's suicide gained traction during the medieval and Renaissance periods, with works such as the Golden Legend portraying Pilate as a man consumed by guilt, who killed himself in exile in Gaul, where his body was thrown into a river. Whether Pilate ended his life in despair or sought absolution through conversion, his death is seen as a tragic conclusion to a life marked by power, guilt, and moral conflict. The blending of history, tradition, and speculation surrounding Pilate's death reflects the complexity of his figure in collective memory. His story has been used over the centuries to explore themes of guilt, redemption, and justice. If Pilate did indeed take his own life, it can be seen as a final expression of his deep remorse. Alternatively, the traditions that suggest his conversion offer a more redemptive view, portraying him as a man who, despite his failings, ultimately sought forgiveness. Over the centuries, Pilate's figure has become a black legend in Christian history. He is often portrayed as a weak and easily manipulated man, lacking the moral courage to stand up for what he knew was right. His life and death serve as a stark reminder of the lasting impact of our decisions and the consequences of yielding to external pressure. Pilate's actions, particularly his washing of hands to symbolize innocence, have been interpreted as a profound moral failure, an attempt to evade responsibility that resonates with ethical dilemmas faced by individuals in positions of power. Christian tradition has vilified Pilate for his role in the crucifixion, though some apocryphal texts offer a more sympathetic portrayal of his character. Theological and historical interpretations of Pilate have emphasized the moral and ethical complexity of his role in the Passion of Christ. His hesitation, followed by his ultimate decision to condemn Jesus, highlights the struggle between justice and convenience. This black legend of Pilate serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of being swayed by external pressures at the expense of truth and righteousness. In many Christian traditions, Pilate is remembered during Holy Week as an example of how cowardice and injustice can lead to devastating outcomes. His story has inspired numerous theological reflections, challenging believers to consider their own moral choices and the courage required to follow the truth, even when it is unpopular or personally costly. Pilate's attempt to wash his hands of guilt has become a symbol of a guilty conscience, attempting to avoid responsibility, a lesson in the futility of evading the moral consequences of one's actions. The story of Pontius Pilate continues to resonate in Christian thought and popular culture, serving as a profound reminder of the complexities of power, justice, and moral responsibility. Pilate's life and death challenge us to reflect on our own roles in society and the responsibility we bear for the decisions we make. As a tragic figure, Pilate's legacy is one of moral failure, but also one that offers lessons on the importance of integrity and the dangers of compromising one's principles. Christian theology has long used Pilate's figure to discuss themes of sin, redemption, and justice. His role in Jesus' death is central to understanding Christ's sacrifice and the salvation that followed. Pilate's impact extends beyond his own life, as his actions have been interpreted in countless sermons, theological discourses, and artistic representations. His story is often used as a case study in ethics, leadership, and the perils of yielding to pressure. Furthermore, Pilate's inclusion in the Creed and the narratives of the Passion ensures that his figure remains a central figure in Christian memory. His story is used in religious and educational contexts to teach about morality, responsibility, and the importance of making just decisions, even in the face of overwhelming pressure. Pilate's memory serves as a reminder that fear, cowardice, and moral complacency can lead to disastrous consequences, not only for the individual, but for society as a whole. In conclusion, the life and death of Pontius Pilate challenge us to consider the weight of our own decisions and the impact they have on the world around us. His story is a constant reminder of the importance of seeking truth and justice in all circumstances, teaching us about the power of redemption, forgiveness, and the pursuit of moral integrity. As a figure of both historical and theological significance, Pilate's legacy endures, offering valuable lessons for generations to come.